You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy. Tonight we have a local election special. We have three candidates who are running for election to Kilkenny County Council. Kilkenny County Council is made up of four electoral areas. You have Castlecomer, Kilkenny City, Callan Thomastown and Piltown, and there are 24 councillors elected to Kilkenny County Council. So joining us this evening, we'll go by geography. So Castlecomer is in the north of the county. We're joined by Daniel Burke, who's the first-time candidate for Independent Ireland. Independent Ireland was formed back in November of 2023 by independent TDs Michael Collins and Richie Donoghue. Daniel is 26 years of age, and he hails from Ballyoskell in North Kilkenny, and Daniel has a degree in finance. Running in Kilkenny City is Sean O'Horgan, who's running for the Labour Party. Sean is a former mayor of Kilkenny from year 2012-2013 and was a member of the Kilkenny Borough Council from 2004 until its abolition in 2014. Sean is also chairperson of the Carlow Kilkenny Labour Party constituency as well. And finally, last but not least, Orla Kelly, who is running in the Callan Thomastown area for Fine Gael. Orla ran previously in 2019 in the Kilkenny City area, and she is now migrated to Callan Thomastown.
Migrated home.
Migrated home, exactly. Orla comes from a very, very strong political family. Her mother was a former mayor of Limerick City, and her first cousin, Deirdre Clune, is the outgoing Fine Gael MEP for Ireland South. And Orla is also an interior designer by trade as well. And for those who may remember her from TV with Duncan Stewart on Open House, which would have been a little while ago, Orla, wouldn't it?
A while ago.
Yeah, so you're all very, very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup. I suppose everyone, the local elections, it's less than I suppose two months away. You've all been kind of out knocking on doors. What has the reaction been, and what are the issues that are coming up on the doors? Whoever wants to take that first.
Yeah,
we'll go ladies first.
So I've been out for a good while in Bennett's Bridge and Thomastown and Dungarvan and all the kind of surrounding areas. So there's a few things that are coming up. So I'd have a lot of things for the engineer, which would be to do with roads, lighting. Now the flooding, obviously, in Thomastown is a really big issue as well. So there has been money allocated for the flooding in Thomastown, but they just haven't started on it. So that's where I think, Thomastown needs a representative with a strong local voice, because we need to advocate for that. While we're lucky to have a new library and a fantastic facility in the hall, there's the Thomastown Community Kindergarten are looking for a building. The thing that's actually really striking is, and I spoke a motion on this on the Ardèche at the weekend, is just that the families with children with additional needs are all having to reinvent the wheel every single time, almost do a full-time job in the bureaucracy of trying to get the services that other children are getting. So that's one of the motions I proposed and spoke on at the Ardèche the weekend that was passed. Also, I'm out about the farmers a lot. I'm running a agricultural event on sustainable farming in the hall in Thomastown. All welcome on the 25th at 8 o'clock. So the farmers are understandably having a really hard time, and a lot of that is to do with not having someone to speak up for them. So even farmers who are doing the right thing as far as PV panels and tree planting and the economic way they're spreading nitrogen and organic farming and all of the climate mitigation targets they've met, they're not getting any credit for that. So that and a sort of a million other things, including I've met lots of really nice Jack Russells, and I'm often asked to give impromptu design advice. And I'm invited into the kitchen to make a 10-second decision. So that's kind of what's been happening out in the campaign trail.
Well, you're busy, and Daniel, you're running in North Kilkenny, Castlecomer, which, like Callan Thomastown, would have a huge rural part to it, with like Castlecomer being the biggest district town. What are the issues that are coming up in North Kilkenny? I know in Castlecomer, water and water quality is a big issue.
It is, and first of all, thanks a million for having me on.
Very welcome.
So yeah, I've started canvassing around Ballyragget, Ballyuskle, Castlecomer. And the main issues that are really coming up on the doors are, like you said, water quality. Then there's which kind of, they're saying to me they don't see their public reps. I asked them, when was the last time any sort of politician came to your door? I said, was it 5 years ago? Was it the last general election? And they said, in the majority of cases, they've never come to our doors. A lot of people are hesitant to call their public reps. So my view is you have to canvass, you have to actively canvass. You can't just leave it for like every 5 years or every by-election and whatnot. So that's a huge issue. And another issue is, when I was knocking on doors, they're like, we're getting leaflets, but then we go to open a door and the politician is nearly halfway down the street, so scared to talk on the doors. And then the big issue in Ballyragget, if anyone that's familiar with Ballyragget, is the old girls' school, or it's now kind of amalgamated now into a junior and a senior school. But the old girls' school is on the main N77. And so the girls' school is on one side of the road, and then the main Glen Vale, so that would be the main housing estate, is on the opposite side of the road. But there's no pedestrian crossing, which to me now, it's not rocket science. And my view is Kilkenny County Council are going to take a reactive approach. They're going to wait until something happens, and then they'll put in a pedestrian crossing. That was a huge issue. Another issue as well was local property tax. So that came up in Ballyragget, but also came up in the rural areas. Like I know with my own house in Ballyuskle, we have our own water pump, we have our own septic tank. So what are we actually getting for our local property tax? Because I know the roads around here haven't been touched for God knows how many years.
It's a very good question.
Exactly, yes. So that's one of my priorities, would be I'd be ensuring that local property tax stays the same, if not a decrease. One of our priorities in Ireland will be eliminating the local property tax for over 65s and USC. In our view, when you're 65, you've spent enough years paying tax. I think it's a bit of time now to kind of
and just
stop being overburdened.
Just one last point. Independent Ireland, can you explain the concept to me? It's kind of it's a registered party with CPO, but members, anybody that joins, they can, if they're elected, they can remain independent elected representatives. So how can you be a party and an independent at the same time? Yeah, if I'm confused, surely our listeners and our viewers are a bit confused. So it's a concept that, you know, I've been trying to grapple with for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so it operates a very loose whip system, parliamentary whip system. So as long as you sign up for the key kind of principles and priorities, other than that, it's a free vote and votes of conscience as well, with local issues as well. Like, for instance, a solution that might work in Roscommon mightn't necessarily work in Kilkenny, and that allows for flexibility in that area. So it's very much, yes, it's a political party, but what I would say is it's more of a grouping. And what I've been saying on doors is, compared to like a traditional independent, if someone comes to me with issues regarding caps payments or a medical card, I have 3 TDs at present that I can refer that to, and then they can bring that directly to the minister or relevant departments.
That's interesting. And Sean, you're no stranger to elections. I think this is your my 4th or 5th election at this.
Fourth.
And I forgot to mention at the top of the program, you also ran in County Kerry back in 1999. So you've experience of running in 2 counties. Yeah, of course, you're a former mayor of Kilkenny City, and you've been out canvassing in Kilkenny City. What kind of issues have been coming up on the doors?
Well, I suppose the first issue in the city is housing. And it's young people on the housing waiting list themselves. young people trying to access a mortgage. And then not just is it those young people, but it's people like myself who are the parents of those young people, who are either stuck living at home, very often young, newly married or established couples in their relationships, you know, sharing a room in their mother and father's house is not the way that any of us wanted to do for more than a night in our relationships. And a lot of that is going on. There is a huge problem with supply in the city. My own son and his partner got one of the last houses that were available for rent in Kilkenny City on daft.ie at the time. It's still very similar. There's a lot of building going on around the city. So one would hope that things will improve in the next 6 months. I mean, we're celebrating today the fact that 45 social houses are being made available within the city in 2 new developments.
For affordable purchase,
with a waiting list of 1,200 people on the social housing waiting list, that's a drop in the ocean. And I suppose we really are paying the price now for the choices that were made, particularly at the time of the collapse of the economy in 2008 and 2009. I've often said it. My most depressing meeting as a member of Kilkenny Borough Council took place in the offices of the Heritage Council of all places back in 2009, when we got a letter from the then Fianna Fáil Minister for Housing instructing us to shut down our housing departments. And we have never recovered from that, being honest. And also, you know, we have to say it was a straight political choice. It became very unfashionable to build council houses. And it was almost like, you know, to live in a local authority estate, you were supposed to be ashamed of yourself in some way. So we had this notion then that we were going to get integration of social and affordable housing in large private estates. And, you know, some of you on the debate here know that very well. And an awful situation where those houses, in many situations, were ghettoized into a corner of an existing private sector development. And it's been a long road back. And I welcome what Leo Varadkar said in the last 48 hours, when he admitted that he had been too cautious and his governments had been too cautious in deciding to step back from the market and allow local authorities to build housing in the way that they always did in housing estates like Fatima Place, where I was for a sad occasion this evening, St. Fiacre's, in New Park, Old New Park, just a stone's throw from my own house here, where very good people in very good families built very good lives, and it's time we return to allowing people to do that again. So for me, housing is the ultimate, and like Orla, I'm looking at the organisation of a public event in the next number of weeks on the housing issue, where I'll bring in people. I ran an online meeting over a year ago now. I did something unusual in that I brought a developer in as part of the conversation, as well as a professor of housing in UCD. And we looked at it from a number of different angles, because it's not simple. And, you know, the approach that needs to be taken is complex, but it's very urgent. And then, similar to Orla, lots of emails into the engineers department, and, you know, blocks missing out of a pretty newly resurfaced junction down at the parade. As you come down from Ormond Street, I was out on the Comer Road today, big ponding of water coming into people's houses, and it being, you know, an intractable issue. Speed is a big issue, and I'm sure everybody's coming across this, you know, what's happened in relation to road safety, to crashes, particularly. I'd have to say the one thing that surprised me is grandparents are worrying about their grandchildren driving on the roads. And, you know, how many young people are being involved in road accidents, particularly in rural areas, but not confined to rural areas. And, you know, they want to see something done within the confines of the city. The new legislation that's promised by the Road Safety Authority and by the Minister is proposing that all speed limits within Kilkenny City, within the ring roads, would be reduced from 50 kilometres an hour to 30 kilometres an hour. And already I'm getting people saying, sure, you can't drive at 30 kilometres an hour, as if somehow the car is going to die if you drive at a slow speed. But it has worked within our estates. Sadly, as a result of a young boy killed in a housing estate in Kilkenny City, not too far away from where I am here. I think
10 years ago.
An urgent priority for us, any of us who are elected as councillors.
So you're talking about housing, and this is coming up in my house as well. My son is the sort of middle income earners are the new homeless now within Ireland, and even trying to get mortgages or even being able to afford a house now. It's the house prices as well that are not affordable, even with the affordable homes. Their price of 255,000, I believe. So even they talk about full employment, but people still cannot afford to pay rent. They can't afford, and I know these are national issues, but you talked about local housing, and speeding, traffic. I'm sure everybody's getting in about the traffic. So speeding, is that more like there's more cycle lanes even up here where I'm parking again. No one's using them. And that's even causing more hassle. So I say that'd be very interesting, Sean, about the speed, and I suppose
but the speed routine. Sorry, if I could get in there for a minute. The technology exists to limit the speed in all the cars. Like do you know what I mean? Like there's no reason why that shouldn't happen. So that your car itself, like the cars are all enabled. So that when you're in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, your car just goes 30. There's no reason why we shouldn't actually jump ahead and just be front runners in that kind of technology end. It's not impossible. It's been done in other places. So, I mean, there are other measures that aren't working. And I think there are traffic calming measures, particularly in the, villages and towns. And the idea of the amount of road policing that would have to happen for everyone to change the entire driving culture and behavior. And I don't think that's necessarily the way to do it. So, I mean, you can look at it. A lot of young drivers sign up to the insurance policy, which is basically if they drive above a certain speed or in the wrong speed, like all of us should have to do that. So you get rewarded for driving safely rather than sending the Gardaí out to over police the roads to punish people when a reward system has been proven the world over to be far more effective.
Is that only on the electric cars order, or is that on ordinary cars where cars can be?
No, it's on ordinary. You can go ordinary diesel cars as well. Any cars.
Diesel cars, but what about petrol cars?
They put in the insurance companies put in a tracker.
So that means everybody would have to put a tracker in the cars.
Well, the insurance company provide it, and then you get rewarded for driving at the right speed limit in the right place.
So that means everybody would have to then be complied to get from the insurance company a tracker put in the cars.
Yeah, well, it's not a tracker. It measures your. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't mean they know where you are all the time.
Well, it is a tracker. I have one before, and it works with GPS because it's able to tell as well what roads you're on. So it's able to tell if you're on a motorway or if you're on a national road or a secondary road. Then it's able to tell your cornering as well, and then speed and that. So it is GPS enabled. Because I'm speaking from experience. I had to have one for a few years, so I wasn't crucified for insurance. And just one little point as well about road safety.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to talk about these highfalutin kind of like trackers and sensors. But at the end of the day as well, our roads themselves are in dire straits. Like there's one road it's by the Valley Inn, if anyone's familiar with that pub. And I'd say there's smoother roads on the moon. There's craters that you could probably fit a medium to large dog in. And so if you come at that at any speed, you'd easily get thrown into a ditch, damage to your car. And then like that's just the best scenario. You could easily end up being in a serious accident. So I think it's great talking about sensors, but I think we need to look after our roads as well.
I agree with you, Daniel, but at the same time, I've been on rural roads for the last, few months canvassing, and they're actually, a good quality road, and cars are driving by at unbelievable speeds. So it is a combination of a few things, but speed and people's personal responsibility is what's causing most of the accidents.
Oh, I agree that there's personal responsibility and speed is definitely an issue, 100%. But I think as well, kind of a simple fix would be to fix potholes. That's a very quick and easy fix. I think.
Sean, you want to get in there?
As it happens, I actually cycled on that road that Daniel is talking about because I took a mad notion to cycle to Nina last summer, and kept on the back roads in order to avoid the main roads, and that road is shocking. But there's also a very simple elephant in the room, and I suppose it does come back to government prioritisation, and that is that the numbers of Gardaí working in the traffic corps has reduced by 40%. And there is a problem with recruitment to the Garda Síochána. There's a problem with recruitment to the Defence Forces. And the reality is that we're all paying the price for that, because it can't be a coincidence that the first time in the last 25 years that we've had rises in road deaths, rises in injuries on the road, coincides with a huge reduction in the traffic corps of the Garda Síochána. And I really think that needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. I think certainly we should look at the technology. We should be open to all of that. I mean, I drove to Maynooth in the rain on Monday, and I was on cruise control, and when I came up behind the car in front of me, my car automatically slows down because the sensors can read the car in front. We're probably not that far away from the kind of world where we're going to be virtually in a self-drive position in a number of years' time. But in the meantime, we have to get the basics right. Yeah. And I think, particularly, we've done this before in the past, and people said, I remember my poor grandmother, God rest her, when seatbelts came in, saying that she would never wear them, and by God, she got to wear it pretty quick because the Gardaí enforced it and clamped down on it and made people change their behaviour. We need that. I mean, to give you an example of the kind of behaviour that can happen in a city, I was cycling across Greens Bridge this afternoon, coming from the roundabout up at the junction with Vickers Street, cycling across the bridge, and a young driver, I'd say at the very most 23 or 24 years of age, in a pretty powerful large car, passed me as I was cresting the brow of Greens Bridge. She had absolutely no way she could see. I actually put my hand out to indicate to her that there were drivers coming in the opposite direction. She missed one car by about 3 inches, and she missed the front of my bike by about 2 inches. Now, whatever car chance the driver in the other car has, I have precious little on a bike. And, the reason that people aren't cycling and using those cycle lanes that Roisin talked about up around Gael's Colostry is because they're afraid of the nonsensical things that drivers are doing that will put them or their children in danger. And to give you a really frightening statistic, this week is National Cycle Week. In 1992, of all of the young people attending secondary schools in Kilkenny, 64% of them cycled to school. That percentage is now less than 3%. And the bottom line is the parents of the city have decided that they're going to drive everybody to school. It's why we have traffic congestion, and it's why we have people with ill health, because we're not doing sensible things around road usage.
Well, just before we move on to the housing, is an awful lot of people are saying, yes, it's okay having all these cycle lanes, but we here in Ireland, we don't have the weather, which in one sense, you could say you don't want your children going out cycling every day in the rain, landing in school, but an awful lot of parents are saying to me about the weather. Now, I cycled and walked to school all the time, my children did, but the weather has been really does affect a lot of parents.
Well, a lot of, like, one of my girls was living in Holland last year, and the other one was living in Belgium. They were on Erasmus, and they have the exact same amount of rain in Amsterdam, and they all cycle. Yeah. So that's it. And the other thing is, if you look at photographs of Amsterdam and other cities in Holland, they had cars, they didn't have trees, they didn't have cycling. That's not an historical thing. So they had cycling. What happened is that their population density became untenable for that kind of traffic, so they kind of had to shift. So but also they did do that, but the weather doesn't affect them in the slightest. But
actually, the countries that Orla mentions there, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden actually have higher rates of rainfall than Ireland do. So there's a very old cliche that I heard from a German tourist years ago: "There's no such thing as bad weather. There's only such thing as bad clothes." And that's the reality. And and actually, just a slight correction on what Orla said, and is what happened in Holland, which is the most celebrated example of cycling around the world, unfortunately, was that 4 or 5 children were killed cycling to school in the early 1970s. And the reaction of the country, particularly the mothers of the country, was to absolutely rebel and revolt and force their government into changing the way things were being done. because being blunt, in this country, everything that has been done from the 1970s on has been done to encourage car use, to put more cars on the road, and effectively to drive everybody else off. I'm from a rural area. I cycled to school when I was going to primary and secondary school, and it was possible to do that then. Those very same schools had virtually nobody cycling to them now.
Yeah, there definitely is something wrong with the traffic. I went out yesterday morning, and for a full hour, the traffic from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock was from the centre of town right into past the King's College, the VEC, and then I had to come back from the ring road, and the traffic congestion right up to the Waterford roundabout. So, but maybe that is something about getting your children out healthier and exercising and everything else. I want to move on to housing. You mentioned housing. What, and we'll put it to the three of you. The housing issue, the housing crisis has been here for years. Where do we go now? How do we actually, can we actually solve the housing crisis and the housing market, and also the house prices? Young people cannot afford the houses that are going on the market these days.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what's happened is, so again, it's got to be a multifaceted approach, as Sean said earlier. So a lot of what's happened, because I work in building and project management, so I'm on site a lot. So a lot of the grants are being taken up at the moment in rural Ireland. A lot of people are getting a restoration grant, which is up to €70,000 now for restoration. And one of the things that I'm working on is a positive aging policy, and I'm going to be doing an event on it as well. So there needs to be a lot more housing for not just older people, but there needs to be single unit housing. Like even in rural Ireland, we need to have collectives of housing or apartments that are just much smaller and much more affordable, because there are a huge amount of people now, for various reasons, and a lot of them are choices, who are living on their own. And the only thing seems to be still this model that we're stuck with of a kind of, a 3-bedroom house or a house with a garden in the front and the back. So to increase the capacity and the availability of housing, I think we're going to have like smaller units of housing, or an amalgamation, or smaller apartment units, even in rural Ireland, even though it's something that we associate just with cities. So what's happened is there's been a perfect storm. Okay, so as Sean said, the council stopped building their own housing. Then we had the recession, then we had COVID, and we also have a huge increase in the population. So what's happening is there's a supply and demand thing. So at the moment, there is a catch-up happening on the housing, but it's definitely going to take another 3 years. And until those housing are delivered, the plot price isn't going to be deliverable. So I think there's a few things we have to look at. The new social housing in Thomastown is absolutely incredible, and it's brilliant, and it's such good quality, and it's right in the centre of the town. There's also a lot of social houses. I don't necessarily agree with Sean. The social houses that are integrated into bigger housing schemes, in my opinion, sometimes from being out canvassing, work really, really well. I don't see them as being ghettoized. I see them as being fully integrated with the rest of the houses. That's the case in the ones that I've been to in Thomastown and Bennett's Bridge anyway. But I think we have to obviously increase the build of social housing, and we have to look at the fact, does that go back into the councils, or is it done by developers? And the costs of housing and the costs of materials, because I work in this, have just gone up astronomically. So what we have to look at then is, different ways of doing housing. I mean, there are really good models in the Scandinavian countries where they just build, bigger apartment blocks. I don't want to call them apartment blocks, because they don't have to be huge volume. But the point is that they are for rent, and that people come and go, and the rent is affordable, and that your lease is controlled. So that what you can do is you can go in there and rent a really nice apartment with a terrace or on the ground floor. If you're an older person, you can also do the same if you're a student, and you can do the same because there are a lot of people who are in a transitory position who want to just live somewhere have somewhere affordable to live for 3 or 4 years while they save or build a house. So we've got to look at that model, and the way the housing becomes more affordable is that if everybody doesn't want or require a full, semi-detached you know, house that has 2 bedrooms and a front and back garden, because that's now becoming really expensive to build. So we've got to look at alternatives and different building methods as well. We've got to look at timber framed houses. We've got to look at modular accommodation, but there has to be a break with this idea of everyone living in this picket fence house, because that's not even what people want.
It's interesting, Ira, you mentioned modular, because I know one banking institution, they will not give anyone a mortgage to build a modular house on the basis that it is modular and it can be moved. So things like that certainly need to be looked at. And I suppose also planning is a big issue as well. You know, there's people that have, their family might have a bit of land in a rural area, and trying to get planning can be next to impossible. Do you think that our planning system needs to be a little bit more flexible and nimble to meet those challenges as well?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. There are ways. I mean, there are ways that the planning don't want the ribbon development, but I think where a family are living in rural Ireland, that it's reasonable that we look at shared services like, you know, the access road or the septic tank, or bringing services in, that there is an economy and scale. If you have we used to always have in Ireland before, like a clan or a group of 7 or 8 houses, because that's again a more affordable way of doing it, and a more affordable way of bringing services and waste and bin collection, everything. So we're going to have to look at that happening. So I understand the planning policy of allowing the villages that are existing to grow bigger, but I think there has to be clusters of houses that happen in rural Ireland as well. And the way to make it more economically viable and for the planning to be better is for them to be in clusters the way that they would have been before.
Daniel, do you want to come on that? And then we'll go to Sean on the housing.
So it's actually interesting that Paul mentioned modular housing. That would be one of the policies of Independent Ireland in regards to emergency accommodation. Because as we know, the current system of having families in hotels and B&Bs just isn't right. No one should raise their families in circumstances like that. Modular accommodation as well would be an ideal fit for kind of emergency accommodation, and even just regular accommodation. Several friends of mine have actually built now these kind of a modular house, but it's like a log cabin where it all comes prefabricated. Comes on site. Now you have to do the groundworks, but then it comes on site and it's put up in a matter of days. And it looks absolutely lovely inside, fixtures and everything. So yeah, modular housing would be a big one. Then as well, you mentioned as well that planning permission, there's so much red tape from what I've heard. The process is very long, it's dragged out. And again, I'm from a very rural LEA, and a lot of people in my area, they would be farmers, or not even farmers, but they'd happen to have a few acres, and they'd set aside even half an acre for a son and daughter to build on, only for the council to then say to them, no, you can't build on that. And that's it. That's a huge issue. Another issue with housing is, and I don't think people really think about it in this way, is Ireland isn't very friendly when it comes to personal investments. So if you're someone that comes into inheritance and you want to make investment choices, well, what are your options? Well, invest in a house and rent it out. Like you're taxed to the hilt for personal investments at the moment. And I was actually looking, the UK have a great scheme. It's an ISA investment scheme where an individual can invest up to £20,000 a year in a cash ISA or in a stock and investment ISA, and then any returns are tax free. And I think that would be great for people that happen to come into a bit of money, or people that just have a spare bit of money, put a bit of money aside, rather than, yes, I have money. First and only investment option is buy a house, and that in itself is clogging up the housing system. So I think there's like I think Sean and Orla were saying, there's not just one reason we have the housing crisis. There's several, and it's a perfect storm. And we really have to be creative and think outside the box.
Absolutely, we could do 7 or 8 programs on housing. It's such a massive issue.
And we have done a few, Paul, in the past.
We sure have, yeah. Sean, you wanted to get in there on the whole subject of housing.
Absolutely, and I mean, I do think, again, coming from a rural area and a very tourism dependent area, the issues of one-off rural housing are complex. I would agree with Orla. I often visit. We had friends here from Brittany last week, As it happens, two of them come from the same family, and the rules in Brittany are that you must build a minimum of 3 houses together with those shared facilities that Orla talked about. And there is that tradition in West Kerry that I'd be very familiar with, west of Dingle Town, where the planning has been so controversial, where there's a series of small villages with 5 or 6 or 7 houses. And I think from a social point of view, that's very important, because I think the opposition to one-off rural housing, there's a logic to it, because I've seen people in my own area in South Kerry build a house when they were in their 20s and 30s, in glorious isolation, maybe a half a mile from the other nearest house. And as soon as they hit 60, they're suddenly needing to move into a village or to a cluster of houses in which they're going to have services in which people can visit them, rely on them, where maybe there's a lack of rural transport in order for them to be able to access services. And just one little thing that I've been talking about for years, and there isn't much of a rural area in my local electoral area for these elections. One thing that has always frustrated me is our inability to think outside the box. We have thousands of school buses running every day out into rural areas, predominantly from towns and villages like M&A and Ballyragget and other companies. They drive out to a rural area, drop people to a rural school, and then they are not allowed to carry passengers on their return journey into the town or village. And to me, it's always made sense that if you're coming in from Ballyoskell and you're coming back into Ballyragget, that you should be able to collect customers on their way back in the way that the local link is trying to do at the moment. Have them in the town or village for 9:30, 9:45 in the morning, collect them at 2:30, bring them back, and then collect the children from the school and drop them home. That would be a joined up service that would be copped on, but unfortunately we don't do it. And in the city, part of the problems that we have is so many of the people that are traveling in from rural areas are coming into the city centre. They're causing that traffic congestion that Roisin talked about. One of the things we need from a development point of view in the city is we need 5 or 6 major car parks on the edge of town where you can connect into the city bus service. You can pick up a bike that you can use to cycle into work in High Street or in the Abbey Quarter or wherever it's going to be in town, or come in and do your shopping and do your business and get the bus back out, pop the stuff in the car and go home, or connect to a local link bus which happens to be coming in. I've done a bit of research, for instance, on the local link service. It's almost impossible from the vast majority of towns or villages in County Kilkenny to get a bus at 8 o'clock in the morning that will have you in town in time for work by 9 o'clock, and then to be able to get that bus back home at 5:30 in the evening, connect with your car or wherever you happen to be in a rural area. Those are the issues that are causing so much congestion and problem. But back to housing in the city, and I do think we need, and I know, Roisin, you have experience of this happening in the States. We do need to make to ensure that where we have integration in the States, it's real integration. Or if we're not going to do that, then we should have, where the council has land, I think we have to be very clear of surveying the land that's in council ownership and build on that land. And again, I would have to agree with Orla. A lot of stuff is being done right. I was canvassing today in a group of apartments where the Brogmaker pub used to be on the Castle Comer Road. Fantastic accommodation. The new tenants are very happy. Some of them have moved from different parts of the country to Kilkenny. Some of them obviously have moved from other countries. And what's being done is being done to a very high standard. The only problem is not enough of it is being done. And and I also think we need to say this. You introduced this part, I think, Paul, by saying that there have been huge problems in recent years, and the reality is that's the truth. We didn't have huge problems with homelessness in Ireland even 15 years ago. We didn't have anything approaching the outrageous amounts of people on waiting lists 10 years ago, 12 years ago that we have now. And unfortunately, I think we have to be political about this. We decided very foolishly to copy the British model of putting all our eggs into the private sector basket. And the bottom line is, whether it's vulture funds or whether it's Irish developers, the bottom line, and I appreciate all Orla saying about increasing costs of building materials, etc., but the reality is it's down to people maximizing their profits, and the losers have been our families. The losers have been people who are turfed onto into emergency accommodation and turfed onto the housing waiting list. And that has been a political decision, and we need a change of direction about that. If we want to have the kind of housing policies that they have in Scandinavian countries, then we need Scandinavian politics. And that's the politics of social democracy. It's not the politics of either the centre right or the far right.
I've been hearing for years everyone saying that the construction companies and the private construction companies are really the winners out of all of the housing and the house prices. And what, should we then sort of change the model of putting the building into private construction, or should we then say maybe the local council should start building their own houses? What's your views on that before we go on this topic?
I think it would be very... Sorry.
Yeah, I start with you, Orla. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think it would be very hard. The scheules have gone from the council now for housing. So, I mean, to be able to find a, plumber, electrician, anything like that, I think it would take, I'm not saying it's not a longer term project, but you would have to reinvest and restructure. A lot of the time, the developers who are coming in and pricing for the public housing, like they've done some like for like comparisons, and it isn't necessarily possible that that the corporation would be able to produce them at a much lower rate. So the thing is, like, yes, it would be a good idea, but it's a longer term thing. So to get all of those skills back into the council would take a very long time.
Well, it would be the same.
Those skills that were depleted over the years.
Sorry, for 1 second. Yeah. But the thing, if private contractors can employ plumbers, electricians, carpenters, well, therefore the local county council can do the same.
Well, they have an economy of scales. That's not really the way it works. So what a developer is going to do, so if, like I would have worked, let's say, on Rathullart, for example, in Kilkenny with the developers there. So what they do is they've got to borrow a huge amount of money. They bring in people for the duration of that project, and then they let them go. So the model that the councils had wasn't that kind of procurement system. So the council would have this many electricians, plumbers, carpenters and stuff like in their employ. So it was actually considered to be a less efficient system for house building, and the houses were produced, but there wasn't as good a cost benefit thing. So you have to look at the developer, where they're paying the money up front and they take the risk, and the houses sell or not. So I'm saying there is probably a place for both, but I think it would take a long time to reskill all the councils in the country with those housing skills that are now lost.
But again, Roisin, we have the perfect storm. It was a deliberate political decision to abolish apprenticeships effectively for 25 years. I mean, I remember when I was a post-primary student, over half my class in a small vocational school went off and did apprenticeships. Many of them far wealthier now than I am, okay? And they were enabled to do that by a really decent public apprenticeship scheme run by companies like the ESB, run by companies like Bord na Móna, run in the old ANCO format, which turned into FÁS afterwards. And the reality is that was abandoned. And I don't see why we have to be punished by the fact that this model, which has failed so disastrously, we're now told that it's the only show in town. And I mean, I think the reality is we can re-establish council housing sections. We can, in the interim, make the private sector work really hard for the tenders that they get from local authorities, because it's very important to do that. It's crucially important that the scandalous situation, and this came up at our party conference, where employers aren't even obliged to pay apprentices the minimum wage. Can you just imagine the nonsense of that? We're asking young men and women. I met a family the other day down on Madeline Street in the city centre. 2 young men, one 19, one 21, who are having to drive to Monasterevin and to Clondalkin to avail of apprenticeships because there are no apprenticeships available in Kilkenny. And both of them, their mother said very stridently to me, she said, their sister is working in McDonald's as a supervisor. She's being paid more than either of the 2 lads that are doing apprenticeships. Is it any wonder that people are getting on planes and going to Australia and Saudi Arabia rather than being enforced to work in slave labour conditions? For, let's be honest, Orla, I haven't met too many impoverished developers for people who are making very handsome and very healthy profits out of doing
I'm
it.
not saying anything. I said it would be a good idea for the councils to re-get those skills. And it's also shown very important that the amount of work that Simon Harris has done to re-establish that entire apprenticeship programme. And I too feel very strongly about that. I proposed and spoke on a motion at the Ardèche saying that there is the dual factor of both snobbery and stigmatism around the apprenticeships, and that there are some schools in Kilkenny that don't even allow people in to speak about the apprenticeships. So what we have to do is, I was saying there has to be a like-for-like reward. If people are doing the same kind of work for a university degree as they are for an apprenticeship, they should do.
And we'll give
credit. Be rewarded in the same regard. There are apprenticeships now that you can do in accounting, in auctioneering, in cyber security. So Simon Harris has done massive work around all of that. And the apprenticeship programme is just set to grow over the years, because there's a huge amount of people dropping out of college. But a lot of that comes from parents in Ireland who think, for some perhaps inherited reason, that there's more value in a less relevant degree than there is in a more relevant apprenticeship. So that has been completely reevaluated.
And sorry, Daniel, I'll let you in 1 second, but I think it would be important to give credit where credit is due. It was Jan O'Sullivan as Minister for Education who radically changed the approach back to apprenticeships. Simon Harris has certainly carried that on in his last ministerial position, and I hope that his successor will do the same, because this is needed. But the reality is, we do need those apprenticeships to be mainstream back.
You have to go over to Daniel now, because you're not getting the same.
Sorry, Daniel.
Daniel, you've been waiting there patiently. I'm sure you have many thoughts on the.
I do. I have one or two
that have been expressed.
It's funny that we mentioned like dropping out of college in first year and second year. I think that's a direct consequence of the grade inflation that we saw from predicted grades during the COVID. I think that is following through now, that people are getting overly generous grades. As someone, I don't want to make assumptions, but as someone that's probably been in the school system a lot more recently, I remember like there was snobbery about apprenticeships. Like my own father, he got his job through an apprenticeship. He was a fitter, and like apprenticeships are great, you know. You can. I think there's lads that done apprenticeships that I was in school with that are probably on more money than me. And I went on to college, I did the masters, that you traditionally would say, oh yeah, well, that chap must be on X amount of money. And that was something I lobbied for as well when I was in school, was that to end the snobbery, to actually advertise that promote that there are apprenticeships out there, and to try and get employers on board. And it is great now that it's opened up, that it's not just the traditional kind of construction or manual jobs that have apprenticeships. Going back to Roisin's initial question about public-private, I think it should be a mixture. I think the more competition, the better, because obviously more competition, it drives prices down. Well, it should drive prices down and drive standards up. So I think a mixture, but I think the councils over the years have been stripped away of the necessary skill sets, and that needs to be returned. So yeah, I think a mixture. I don't think there should be one or the other.
And I know that you're all contesting a local election, but does the national how the National Party is doing, does that have any bearing at all? Sean, I know Ivana Batcha, she's the current leader of the Labour Party. Before she was leader, Alan Kelly was leader, and before he resigned, one of the issues that was being talked about internally was the poor rating in the polls. Since Ivana Batcha's been leader, the poll ratings have not exactly been fantastic. But how do you think she's doing, and does the national state of, say, the Labour Party, which whom you're running for, does that impact on yourself running a local election? Of course, you have a running mate in the city with Andrea Clear.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have to be honest. Of course, it does to a certain extent. There is a perception of a party. I joined the Labour Party in 1987. In 1987, we got exactly the same percentage of the vote as we got at the last general election. And people often wrongly say that the last general election was our worst election. That's not the case. Unfortunately, in those days, you had a lot less choice outside of the main, as it was called, 2.5 party system. You didn't have the presence of Sinn Féin as a mainstream political party. You didn't have on the left people like People Before Profit. You had a tiny Green Party, and you didn't have the Social Democrats. I mean, for me, the division of our party into effectively two parties between the Social Democrats and the Labour Party is a disaster for the centre left in Ireland. I think the sooner that we come together, the better it is for both of our parties. We are the oldest
Social
party.
Democrats are not keen on that. It's been
But
mooted.
some of them aren't, and some of that's about personalities. But I think in time we saw it in the 1990s, where Democratic left and where the Democratic Socialist Party amalgamated with the Labour Party. But in terms of back to your question, does it really matter? I think predominantly in local elections, people vote for candidates, and they vote for people who they know have a track record of either voluntary or community or political work in their areas, people who they know can articulate their own views and speak on their behalves. So certainly we'd be hoping that we will do better in the local elections than our national poll ratings exist. And the other thing I'd say too is we do need to be careful, because elections take on a life of their own. I have the front page of the Irish Times from 2011 at the beginning of October, which said Labour now the biggest party in the state on 36%. And 6 weeks later, we ended up on 19%. So, things changes, fortunes can move up and down, and elections create a dynamic of their own. The polls said that the two referendums recently were going to be passed with 65% majorities. 3 weeks later, it proved to be very different.
Well, we'll come to the referendums maybe at the end, but Daniel, do you want to come in there?
What was the initial question, Paul? I'm sorry.
You're an independent, so you don't have a party. So how is that going to affect with people saying, oh, you're an independent, but you're with an independent alliance? How's that going to really affect that? With, okay, well, who are you going to vote for? What's the voting? And, are you going to, there's a lot of perception out there that independents wait and see what way the wind's blowing before they make a decision.
Well, I've actually had a very positive reaction on the doors, and people have actually said to me, we're not voting for parties, we're voting for independents.
Is that trendy though at the moment? Is that a trend?
Sorry?
Is that trendy to say that and do that?
I think it's because people want change. They want to give something else a go. I think people are sick and tired now. They've had Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, the Greens in for a good number of years, especially Fine Gael, and I think they want to change things up. And
how can independents bring change when there's so many independents that it could be actually fractured?
Well, on a local level, you can definitely drive change, but even on a national level, with
even locally, how can independents bring change locally? When the comment is, oh, we'll make deals and we'll wait to see what way the wind's blowing, or we'll put our feet outside the front door to see if it's wet or dry and see what people's opinions are. The independents will always go with what deals they're getting in the background.
Some independents surely, but with myself anyway, I put on my leaflet exactly what my priorities are, and I'm going to stick to those priorities. And I think the way independents can come in is they can kick up a fuss on the council and kind of shame other councillors into making the right decision. I think that's where independents can come in. Yes, they mightn't have the whip, they mightn't have the groupings, but I think if they have a good enough voice, they can shame councillors into action. And that's the basis I'm running on. My tagline is a new no-nonsense voice for Kilkenny. If I see an issue, I'll call it out. I don't have someone up in Dublin telling me what way to vote. I will vote for what represents my community the best, and that's it.
But you're part of the Independent Alliance. So
the Independent Ireland, yes.
Miscommunication there between independents but being part of an independent alliance. So I don't know how that's going to work with people going, oh, but who am I actually voting for?
Like I said, it's more of a group and then a party, and it's a very loose whip system. Our priorities are set out. They're the basic principles. After that, like I said, with local issues, we have a free vote and a vote of conscience. At the end of the day, and I said this at the start as well, something that might work in Roscommon mightn't necessarily work in Kilkenny. The same, something that might work in Castlecomer mightn't necessarily work in Thomastown. Right. And that's where we come in, where we have that flexibility.
So this is your first time running for election,
Yes, it
right?
is.
And so what got you into politics? And have you been a part of a political party before?
I have been a part of a political party before. I was a member of Fine Gael for a good few years.
How many
And
years?
then,
A good few years. How many?
oh, I joined roughly 2014.
Right.
And then I was a member officially until about a year and a half ago, but then I was inactive for about 3 years. I did make calls for Leo Varadkar to resign. And then Fine Gael shut the branch down in Kilkenny. That's well publicised if you give it a Google.
Okay, but we won't go into that.
All right,
I'm
can I
talking
make
about you.
I can make a correction there because that's actually not a true statement.
Okay.
So if the head office cannot shut down any branch, there was a point at one stage in Kilkenny where people who were claiming that they were, and this is, I'm not talking about your case in particular, but people who were using a social media handle for Fine Gael and were saying that certain branches had decided things. They were not members of that branch and they had not been elected into that branch. So any allegation, head office do not and cannot, you don't even know the rules of Fine Gael. Head office cannot close a branch, and they did not close a branch. But if people are claiming to be a member of a branch and claiming things on social media when they're not elected or responsible to do so, or they haven't been voted, or the Fine Gael is a democratic party. So people are going to take a solo run and say things on social media and call for Fine Gael leaders to resign when they have not been elected. They have no right to do that. They're not speaking for anybody else. Then that is not democratic. And Fine Gael don't work like that. And it is categorically 100% untrue that Fine Gael closes down branches. That's just a lie. It's untrue.
Well,
Thank you, Orla.
we got
Daniel,
notification.
have you
Sorry
been
now, Roisin, I have to respond to that now, and I'll be
Well,
very
Yeah,
short.
absolutely. Yeah.
Because I've
but
got a
we don't want any
less time.
litigation here. We
No.
run under the same rules as media law, and we don't want any defamation cases. So we have to be factual.
Well, Ornamed points about me. So if
We
I
have
can't
to
No,
be
make time
factual.
back,
I didn't say
Daniel.
anything about you. I said the way Fine Gael works. I didn't mention anything about you. I said specifically, this is not to do with you, but an example of people who are saying things who haven't been elected. So I didn't say anything about you, but the point that is true is that head office cannot close down branches. That's all I say. And
They
that's
amalgamated
Daniel,
branch,
have you
though,
joined
in my
another
view.
party apart from Fine Gael?
So I left Fine Gael basically 3 years ago. I was inactive for about, well, actually 2 or 3 years. I left Fine Gael and I was politically homeless. And then I thought there was no alternatives at the time. So what would that have been? Probably January, February. And then the only alternative was A2. Joined A2. Within about 2 or 3 months, I was like, no, not a chance.
You've been party hopping then. Party hopping and then
I was
independent.
in A2 for about 2 or 3 months. I
But
wouldn't call that
hopping.
party
So
hopping,
you're
considering
like
I was
going
in
from
Fine
one
Gael for a
political
good
party
10
to
years
another.
before that. So
But you're going from
I'm not,
one political party to another, and now you're
well,
independent.
yes, because in A2 from the outside,
No,
it seemed like
but you're not in A2, so we don't want to, but you know what I'm saying is that's A2, we're not talking about A2, we're talking about you. So you remember Fine Gael,
yes,
you left
I was a
Fine
member of
Gael,
Fine Gael, yes.
then you went into A2, and now you're in the Independent Alliance.
Yes, Independent
Right.
Ireland, yes.
And
So Sean, you want to come in there quickly?
Roisin, yeah, I think, I hate to insert myself into the middle of a former Fine Gael row. But I just like to address one thing that Daniel said, and I think it's very important. Because there is a trend where people are looking at independence at the moment. Both Orla and I have been party members for a long time. I sat as a party councillor on Kilkenny Borough Council. I was never told what to do by anybody in Dublin or in Kilkenny or anywhere else. I very much had a mind of my own. And I like Daniel's slogan, but the same slogan could apply to all of us. I mean, anybody who knows either Orla Kelly or myself would know that we're not shrinking violets. We're not afraid to say what we feel. We don't always agree with our party leaderships. And sometimes our party leadership follows suggestions that we make, and sometimes we disagree with them. And that's the reality. And, the issue of votes of conscience, I went through a transition in my own views, for instance, in relation to the abortion issue from the time that I was a young activist and very strongly pro-life, right through to being very strongly involved in the campaign for the repeal of the 8th Amendment, because I learned about stuff in life and it changed my mind. There's nothing wrong. And I would say to Daniel, if he joined in too and then went on to be an independent, fine. You know, I mean, we all looked at the options at different times in our lives.
Yeah, but we're talking about the voters though, Sean.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's,
but
we're getting clarity from the voters of why people are going from party hopping and then discrediting other party hopping, other parties. So it's, voters want to know who they're voting for.
Yeah,
and that is key.
But I think also, you know, we need to be very clear that the ability to change your mind or modify your opinion or the way you look at things isn't a bad thing in politics, and isn't a bad thing in life in general. But I mean, I would say to Daniel, this notion that you're going to go into a meeting of Kilkenny County Council and Mary Hilda Kavanagh has received a set of instructions from head office in Dublin to tell Orla Kelly and everybody else in the Fine Gael group what to do, and that Tomás Pernach will do likewise if I'm sitting with them in Kilkenny County Council, is simply fiction. It just doesn't exist. There's a notion out there that there's this all-embracing whip system that destroys politics. The reality is, if you go into Kilkenny County Council as an independent, the first thing you're going to have to do on the first day of the council is sit down with people from other groupings and say, how are we going to do this? And I would have to say, I'd be a little bit offended by this notion that I needed an independent councillor to shame me into doing anything.
I likewise think the language around shaming, because Daniel, the point of a council really in the end of the day is that everybody has to collaborate. And it's the same in government. Everybody has to collaborate to make the best decision for Kilkenny. So working in that kind of collaborative place is not really about shaming people. You can have robust debate, you can come with good ideas, but shame is a very negative word to approach something that is ostensibly a lot of people who are interested in the best thing for their local area. And shame is just not part of that whole dialogue.
Look, I am obviously, if I was elected to Kilkenny County Council, I would try my best to work with other councillors, of course. Yeah, numbers, there's strength.
I don't want you to shame anybody.
I'm sorry, Roisin, can I please? I'm sorry, Roisin, can I please?
But the word shame, no, but I'm going to be here because the word shame, at the end of the day, we are covered by media law, right? So even social media comes under media law. We have to be factual, Paul and I here, just like any other media platform. So we have to be strict here with that. You may not understand.
Right, okay, I'll rephrase it. I'll rephrase it. Put fire under people. Sometimes I think.
Well, no, we won't. Can you change that word and put fire under people? Some woke people out there. No, this is important, Daniel. You can put your head up, but this is important when you're going onto a platform. The language that could be inciting violence. Put fire under people.
No, come on.
No, I'm just telling you. So maybe you don't realize.
Give people a nudge in the right direction. Like what words do you want me to use? I'm sorry now.
Well, I want you to use, if you're going into politics, the voters and any media platform want you to use really professional language.
The point I was going to make is I would be more than willing to work with other groups.
Thank you.
100%. There's strength in numbers. Like I was saying before, you interrupted me, Roisin. Okay.
Well, I'll interrupt you when it comes to protecting the integrity of the media platform, because we are covered under media law. Maybe you're not aware of that.
Anyway, like I said, I'd be more than happy to sit down with the other elected councillors. Of course, strength in numbers. There's no point causing division for the sake of causing division. But again, if they didn't listen, or there's, for whatever reason, issues came to awry, obviously then I would have to use my voice to try and get people to move in the correct way, because there's no point being afraid to speak up because you're the only independent in the room and everyone else is in Fine Gael, Labour and Fianna Fáil.
Okay, but we
That's
have to,
the point I'm trying to
move
make.
over to Orla now about, Paul, would you like to rephrase that conversation?
Yeah, Orla, of course, there's a new leadership in Fine Gael, because Fine Gael have been in government 13 years. That is a very, very, very long stretch of time. Do you think Simon Harris is going to bring a new, as he said, be a new energy? But do you think that will makes the difference in a local elections?
I think it makes a slight difference. So the good thing about Fine Gael is when Leo Varadkar decided to stand down, there was a choice of really good people like Helen McEntee, Heather Humphreys, Pascal Donoghue, you know, Simon Coveney, Simon Harris, the fact that we had that kind of a bench to choose from, in my opinion, is a really good thing. I think the fact that Minister McEntee is staying in Justice is good, and that Pascal Donoghue is staying in Finance.
Would you like to see
Harris, I personally think he is very good. I think he's incredibly empathetic. I think when you're talking to him in a room, he is a really good listener, and it doesn't matter who he's in the room with. So I think he will be really good. And I think a lot of, you know, and this gets back to what Daniel was saying, like the future of politics in the Dáil in Ireland will probably always be coalition. And this is the way that the Scandinavian countries are all going. It's quite the norm to coalesce, you know, that there isn't this thing. So going into politics is about being able to work with other people. So the reason why Fine Gael are in government is because they were able to form a coalition last time, and Sinn Féin were unable to do so. So a lot of being in politics is to do both on the council and in the Dáil of being able to work with other people, being able to listen to other people. As Sean said earlier on, it's a good thing to be able to change our mind, and we should allow people to change their minds, because that's how politics and idea evolves. You know, during COVID, lots of people changed their minds. On the housing crisis tonight, we're all talking about people thinking outside the box. There's been a perfect storm. Okay, now we have to look at this from a more objective point of view. So in a way, I'm personally think Simon Harris is really, really good. But I think in the local elections, I mean, I've been out canvassing. A lot of people are saying, you know, they have a job. There are obvious issues, but a lot of people in Ireland are saying that they want the stability of this government to continue. So that's to do with it. I mean, if there are people coming in being interrupters and being divisive just for the sake of it and wanting to shame other people, that's not really what makes the decisions. So what you have to do is, in government and in the council, as Sean well knows, there's a certain amount of money, and you have to make strategic decisions about how to divide that most fairly. There will obviously be people who don't get what they thought, or other people who got more. And this is the thing that an independent can do, is just disagree with everything and say money should have been given to anyone. But the real politic that happens, that Sean is well aware of, is just dividing up the money that you have, most particularly. And the other thing Daniel said about people not paying property tax and lowering property tax, and certain cohorts not paying property tax, regardless of how much money they have, when he mentioned the over 65s, is that money is then taken from the council budget, and then you have to either give less money to an organization. So, I mean, that's just a silly thing to say, like, oh, we're going to do this, because you have to say, okay, we're going to do this. If there's someone very wealthy who's over 65, we're not going to charge them any property tax, but where are you going to get that money from? Are you going to cut your health budget? Are you going to charge 10 times for parking? I mean, as an independent, that's a flawed system, that you can just come out with things like saying, I do this, I do that, I do that, the other. The whole thing about it is you have a certain amount of money, and if you're going to be giving out free stuff to people without means testing it, you're going to have to analyze where you're going to first of all figure out how much that would cost, and then you're going to have to figure out, oh, but if I'm giving people who have a lot of money, I'm taking away their property tax, then you might have to take that from someone who's less well off within your council budget. And, you know, you can't just say stuff like that and not have a reciprocal way of, have you costed like how much that would cost within Kilkenny County Council to give everyone over 65 so they don't have to pay their property tax?
Can I just add before I go to Daniel? I'll give you an opportunity to respond to that, Daniel. We did invite both representatives from Sinn Féin. We contacted both Stephanie Donny and David Kennedy, and unfortunately they weren't available. So we're just letting our viewers aware of that. Daniel, do you want to respond to some of those comments made there?
So like the local property tax is kind of one of the priorities of Independent Ireland. And what I'll say is another priority of Independent Ireland is to look into NGOs. 6.2 billion is spent on NGOs. I'd say the vast majority of people wouldn't be able to name more than 4 or 5 NGOs.
Yeah, but could you just give me the amount that taking that property tax away from over 65s, have you costed that within the council in Kilkenny? How much would that cost you?
I doubt it'd be 6.2 billion anyway.
Oh, no, but where are you going to get that money from?
Like I just said, Independent Ireland is looking at the NGOs, and to be honest, 6.2 billion is
Okay,
far
but
too
Daniel,
much.
in all due
Yeah,
respect,
but-
we're asking you, we're not asking Independent Ireland, we're asking you as a local representative. And this is, we're not asking, talk about NGOs, we're asking you, where will you get the money? And that's a very legitimate question the listeners and the voters want to know. We don't want you passing the buck, we're asking you. This is where we're saying about maybe where fractured is your stance of saying you're independent and your independent alliance. So this is a very valid question. So maybe even answer, if you can answer that. I know you might think you're getting a hard time, but you know, this is media, this is politics. Daniel Burke, you're running as an independent. So are you running as an independent alliance, or are you running as an independent? And can you answer all the Kelly's questions?
Like I said, it's Independent Ireland. It is a party with a very loose whip. Right, so it is a party. Like I said, I mentioned that before earlier on. It's a party with a very loose whip. Okay, the party's policy in regards to local property tax is to eradicate it for over 65s, same to USC. One of the ways we would be looking to fund that is to look into NGOs, which at the moment is 6.2 billion. Now, I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Roisin, could I just...
Sean, you want to pop in there, and then we'll just go to our next
come in there
topic.
because I'm really fed up of this playbook of the new right in Ireland and the far right in Ireland, and it's straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. Let's talk about NGOs. Let's talk about organisations that the state is funding and that have no responsibility. Orla has been involved with the National Women's Council. I've previously been involved in organisations like Threshold, Focus Ireland. Very famously back in 2009, the Fianna Fáil Green government of the time abolished the Combat Poverty Agency and abolished the National Consultative Committee Against Racism in one day. Two organisations we could damn badly do with now. And the reality is people working in NGOs are being targeted by the new right as being somehow or other people who are not to be trusted.
Okay, Paul, Sean, can I just interrupt you there? Who are the new right? Because I know I'm sick to God of the far right, the new right. You know, who's inventing all the new right? That's the question I'm putting to you.
I mean, I think very clearly. I have a book on my bookshelf in the library.
And I'm not asking about books. I'm asking you, Sean. And I'm a former Labour member, right?
Yeah.
This is where the narrative that everyone and viewers are all sick of, the naming of the new right.
Well,
let's take that language, as I said, the language of shame out. I don't want that language here. The new right.
Well, I leave it up to the viewers, Roisin, to decide who they believe is on the new right. I think people.
The new right. Who is the new right? No, Sean.
I mean, you know, Roisin, if we want to go down this route, I'll name out the groups. You know, the Irish Freedom Party. And certainly I believe a number of the independent alliances who are taking very strong anti-immigrant stances, who are taking very strong anti-NGO stances, as is put out here. You know, we have abandoned in this state the responsibility for doing so much to charitable organisations and to non-governmental organisations. And now we're turning around and saying we take all the money off them that will provide facilities for example, as I am, who advocate for people, you know, run by the brother of the Taoiseach, advocate for people with autism. Who's going to take up those campaigns? Who's going to do it if we abolish all the NGOs? Are we going to abolish the National Roads Authority? Are we going to abolish the Road Safety Association? These are all non-governmental organisations. So we've got to say what we're going to do here and who's going to fill the gap. If the Good Shepherd Centre in Kilkenny isn't going to be providing facilities for the homeless, who the hell is going to do it? You know, that's the reality. I'm going to be at a pub quiz next week supporting homeless charities in Kilkenny City. So, I mean, I think we need to be really careful with this discussion. And I think we need to call people out on it. You know, there are social levels of social provision that this country needs. As a socialist, I would love that all those provisions were being provided by the state. But if Daniel's going to insist that half the population don't pay property tax, the other half don't pay USC, the reality is we have the lowest rates of taxation in Europe as it is. And I'm sure Daniel, as a financial person, knows this. We have extremely low rates of personal taxation. And we have virtually, you know, the property tax was the closest we ever came to a local tax in this country. And unfortunately, it has been consistently cut or consistently kept at the level it is by the representatives of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and occasionally being joined in a populist fashion by Sinn Féin, instead of saying, this is the pot we need, because Orla referred to the pot that the council has to divide up. The reality is we have the weakest system of local government in Europe, as clearly identified by the European Commission a number of weeks ago. In order to strengthen that, councils have to have money to spend. And I know that there are many people in our society who would contribute more in tax were they to know that they were going to get housing for their children, that they were going to get the better roads that Daniel talked about earlier on. But instead of that, we're on the Tory American model of cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes, and then expect services of a Scandinavian nature. The two don't work together.
Okay, now we're running out of time here, so what we're going to bring that back to is the parties, and I'm sure you're getting it on the doors that you're not listening to your no political party, that only one political party actually got it right with the referendum. You talk about NGOs. The NGOs all got it wrong too, Sean. Not listening to the parties, are not listening to the voters, the grassroots, and even the grassroots members of political parties. Orla, I'll come to you first. You know, Fine Gael, did they get it wrong? Apart from Charlie Flanagan, you know, he said that you came out and said, you know, the referendum was wrong. In 2018, Charlie Flanagan said that and Paul and I was even talking to him at the weekend. He said the referendum was wrong, the wording was wrong, and the timing was wrong. So what do you think? How did we're talking from Fine Gael? Do you think Fine Gael have really come to a stage where they have a disconnect with the core grassroots members, the voters, and people, the country?
No, I don't agree at all. So the people who were, so I was up at the Art Ash the weekend. The connection with the grassroots is very good. I'm on the doors. The connection with people is very good. I think someone like Michael McDougall taking up the cudgel. Michael McDougall has never been a friend of anyone liberal or of women either. So for him to take this up, the thing that I do understand is that people had very many and complex reasons for voting against this. It's also not so much to do with government parties disconnecting, because when they did the exit poll, the highest number of people who voted no, Sinn Féin was above 90% of their people. They also promoted for the referendum as well, and there were over 90% of Sinn Féin members who voted no. So what there was, this is just in my opinion from all the people I spoke to, is that women primarily felt that what they were doing in the home was very important. So they felt that the changing in the constitution was somehow taking from that. So I would say, and there's no point saying anything patronizing like people didn't understand it, people didn't explain it. I think people did understand it. Now, I personally found the language around that of the, you know, woman's places in the home, and that anything she does outside the home is at the neglect of the children. So the entire caring, and again, you know, it's back to that almost shameful language that Daniel was using, that, you know, you neglect your duties, and, you know, it's your responsibility.
I never said neglect.
If the family is neglected, that you do something like that. So I think it was very complex, and I think the people spoke, and then the government parties turned around and said 100%, yes, we were listening, and yes, we obviously need more to do around care. And some of, you know, a lot of what I'm dealing with at the moment as well, people door to door, is, you know, there are a huge amount of women who have gaps in their PRSI payments because they're either working part-time, caring for older people, caring for their children. So I think we have to find a way, and I know there's been some part of legislation towards this, of retrospectively doing that, because we do have to acknowledge the care. But absolutely no, 100%, I don't think. I think a referendum is, you ask the people what do they think, and they tell you what they think. And then as government, again, it's about compromise and listening to people. You listen to them and you say, okay, now we're going to have to do something more to recognize all the unpaid care that women do. So that's what I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Sean, as a political party and Labour.
Absolutely, and Roisin, you know, I think very often people gloat and they celebrate when a referendum, because certainly for the media, it gives them a great opportunity to have an old bash at political parties and how wrong they got it. I believe that the political parties did get it wrong, but not during the referendum campaign. They got it wrong when the Citizens' Assembly recommended a form of wording which didn't include either of the apples that were thrown into the barrel during the referendum campaign. And if the government had listened at that point, had accepted the amendments that the Labour Party put on instead of guillotining the discussion and ploughing on headlong with the referendum. And also, this has to be said straight up, the government parties did nothing to actually secure a victory other than appearing on TV and local radio programmes. I spent almost a week campaigning in the city centre in High Street in Kilkenny. I went out and wore the shoe leather for this referendum, and the people I met in High Street told me that they hadn't been canvassed by another politician of any other party in any way. Not a leaflet through the door, not a poster erected. People just literally didn't take this seriously. And I think there was a presumption that because of the pro-life of the repeal the 8th Amendment, because of the Marriage Equality Amendment, that we were on a roll and sure people were going to do what they were asked to do.
But in all fairness, Sean, your political party, Labour political party, was a yes vote and
Absolutely.
very adamantly out there. And your party leader, a woman, got it very wrong.
Yeah, and I don't, again, like Orla, I don't accept that analysis of it, Roisin. I believe our party looked at the two referendums. We had problems, as we said, very publicly with the wording of both, but we decided that the passing of both referendums would be a step forward for Irish women, would be a step forward for people with disabilities. I still believe that. I think the reality is that this issue will come back on the table. Whether it comes back sooner or later, it will come back. But I know
20-something million, Sean.
But I mean, the reality is, Roisin, democracy costs money. Elections cost money. And I think this is a stale old argument about, you should do nothing because it costs too much. The reality is the referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment cost exactly the same amount of money as the recent referendum. But because 70% of people agreed with the outcome, then that was money well spent. The reality is you make a call. There were bad calls made around the referendum, how it was organised, how it was held. I would hope that the parties in government will learn from that before they come back in the future. But we've been there before. The first divorce referendum failed in 1986. The lessons were learned, the legislation was put in place, and it passed 10 years later in 1996.
Yeah, but you get it wrong, and you have a female leader of a party, and she was still adamant, yes. And
absolutely, and she would argue with you to this day, Roisin.
She got it wrong.
She's not listening
to the people.
The crystal ball in hindsight says, as Orla said, if the people disagree with you, it's not the people who are wrong. The reality is, if people disagree with you, you either haven't asked the question in the right way, which is my view about what happened, and if you're going to do it again in the future, do it right.
Orla, you want to come in there?
Oh, no, I was saying I was out canvassing and doing the shoe leather and canvassing for the referendum. That's all.
Well, I was out canvassing as well, and I was out canvassing for the no.
Time is nearly against it, so I'm going to go around to everybody. And Orla Kelly, in about, I can give you a minute. Could you put your final pitch to our viewers to say anybody living in the Callan Thomastown area why they should give you their #1 vote?
Well, I hope to be a very strong voice for the people in Thomastown, and I'm prepared to work hard. And I know people have used that term loosely, but I have already got back to countless people doing reps for them, sorting things, fundraising, getting information. So that's going to happen. I think we also need to have a long-term view for rural Ireland and for all these amazing villages. So I'm prepared to look at positive ageing, at sustainable agriculture, at housing, thinking outside the box, and at public electric community, at hubs of transport, because that's going to be the future. So I think we've got to be quite brave to actually imagine what somewhere like Thomastown or Inishtig or Bennett's Bridge or all these villages in rural Ireland, imagine what that's going to be like in 20 years in a very visionary way, and then work backwards from that rather than doing knee-jerk reactions of what's going to happen here. So that would be my pitch.
Very, very good.
And I would like a
Dan-
number one, and if people happen to have an allegiance with the previous councillor in my area, I would be delighted with a number 2 or 3.
Absolutely. Daniel, you're next on my screen, so I'll go next to you. Why should the people in Castlecomer give you their number one? What's your pitch?
Yeah, so my pitch is basically kind of a new, young, fresh voice, someone who won't be afraid to kind of get out on the ground, and actually meet constituents regularly rather than just once every 5 years or whenever there's an election. To be proactive rather than reactive. And again, my priorities would be transport connectivity, to review how the local property tax works, and to just listen to people and listen to our farmers and our rural communities. For too long, they've been sidelined. And like the local property tax, to see, are we getting value for our money? Because I think, to be honest, if our roads were being fixed and we were getting services, I don't think anyone would complain about the local property tax. But at the moment, I know in my area, we certainly aren't getting value for money. So yeah, please vote number one for me, or your next highest preference.
And last but not least, Sean, you're run for the Labour Party in Kilkenny City. So we'll give you a minute. What's your final pitch to our viewers?
Well, I suppose very quickly, I've
City.
walked the walk in the past. I'm able to walk the walk again in the future. Today I was out on the Comer Road. I proposed 2 things as a councillor, or 2 of the things I proposed as a councillor was a city bus service and a city bike rental scheme. And I was told at the time that neither of those could happen because we didn't have the critical mass, as it was called, in Kilkenny City. They came into place, unfortunately, after I ceased being a councillor, but they've happened. And I'm really proud of those achievements. I think we can do that again with the other facilities that are needed in the city. I also pioneered, as both of you will know, the campaign for a skate park, which finally happened down in the city centre and gave people not interested in the majority sports the kind of facilities they wanted. I have experience, but I also am constantly looking at trying new things and making it happen. I'm committed. For instance, I cycle every day, I walk every day within the city, and I'm glad to have the privilege of doing that in a compact city. I believe we need a pedestrianised city centre. I believe we need a city centre which is sustainable for everybody. I believe we need to be careful where we put our housing. We need to connect it up with public transport from the far reaches of the city, so that mothers with buggies and elderly people can get easy access to the city centre. And finally, we need a thriving city centre full of independent retailers who do their thing, supply local stock, present us with local food produce, present us with local cafe services, and that we have a place where everybody feels welcome, whether they were born in Kilkenny or not.
Yeah. Okay, you might have gone over a minute there, but
give her a hand.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm sorry, Daniel, you might think, you know, we've been tough on you, but as a media platform, we do come under, as I said, media law, and also with defamation, and we have to keep to facts. Because we have to protect everybody else's reputation, and we have to protect our own reputation too, at sticking to facts. Media law, you know, I know it's great being everything else, but when you go on a media platform, whether it's on social media, on YouTube, or as Paul is still on local radio, my background is in media and PR, and as a former radio presenter, you cannot say mistruths or facts that or what you presume is true. They have to be facts. Otherwise, there's lawsuits and high court actions as well. And it would also destroy your reputation in not giving facts as well. So it's not that I'm being hard. I have to protect the reputation of Irish Political Roundup, and also ensure that no mistruths or misconceptions are being said about anybody personally or any other political party here. That's just not fair, and we can't do that.
Absolutely. And finally, we'd like to say thanks to all three for taking part. It's been a very, very interesting debate. It's been robust at times, but it's all been in good spirit, and we wish you all the very, very best of luck for the local elections coming up in June. So Best of luck to everybody there, and anybody that puts their name on a ballot paper. It takes guts and courage. So you certainly, all three, you have that in abundance anyway. So from Roisin and I'd like to say thank you for taking part in our debate this evening.
And maybe
Thanks
we'll
very
see
much,
you
Roisin.
all.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Paul.
much. And maybe
All
we'll see
good,
you
Bert.
all off at the camp centre. As
Thanks a
best
million,
as-
guys.
The very
Thank
best. luck.
you.
Maybe we'll get you
Thank
on
you.
again before the election as well. Maybe talking about different subjects.
Okay, thank you.
Lovely.
Okay,
Thanks
good
a
night.
million.
Bye.
Thanks, Graham.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.